Hey there, I'm Gregory L. with the playlist, and it's not the most beautiful movie, it's just so gorgeous. Please welcome the director of Wendy, Mr. Benh Zeitlin. So, the easiest question first is where did the idea come from tackling the Peter Pan myth?
Apologies for my voice, first of all. I've been talking a lot. It's sort of been with me my entire life, honestly. I think that me and my sister, who I wrote the film with, had been playing with Peter Pan since we were small children. He was like an invisible character in our lives always, and sort of like our sort of evolving relationship with growing up from being terrified of it to being, you know, to just going through it, being excited about it, like this sort of idea of kind of telling an adventure story where the stakes were around whether or not you would grow up is something that we've always related to very much as, kind of people trying to kind of live by a code, sort of stay true to sort of making art in this very sort of liberated, free way, which is often considered impractical and immature. I think that this idea of whether or not we would grow up has always felt like it was at stake in our lives, and so I think that the story's always felt very close to us in that way.
And you were thinking about making this movie even before you made Beast of the Southern Wild, is that correct?
Yeah, it was on the list. Yeah, it was always like this was always a movie that we thought we would never get a chance to make because it was so impractical and crazy, and no one would ever allow us to do it. And so sort of right in the aftermath of Beast, when we sort of saw we were going to have kind of a chance to like pitch anything and maybe have someone say yes to it, it was like, we've got to do this one because we may never get this chance again. They'll probably kick us out of the building once we do this. So like let's do the one that we've always dreamed of and do it as big as we can do it and go for it.
Okay, so did you always think that the island would be somewhere in the Caribbean? Was that always someplace where Neverland would be? When did that inspiration come from?
No, I mean, once we decided to do it, I think me and my sister realized that we had these radically different imaginations of what the film actually was. The thing that we really shared is that we wanted to sort of strip away the fairy magic and the sort of things that made the story feel very distant and very like, you escape to another world and there are things that are impossible happening. We wanted to like sort of bring in, take the magic and bring it into kind of the magic of nature and the magic of the planet and things that are tangibly magical that you can actually touch and feel and see and make a film that we could shoot for real and not create inside of a computer, not build. And so there was this idea of what would be the fountain of youth in the film. What is the force that kind of like on Earth that feels the most like childlike? And I think that we both sort of agreed that once we sort of decided that a volcano was sort of a perfect symbol for like where things are volatile and youthful and wild, we began sort of searching for a place that had a volcano to shoot on, which is turned out to be the island of Montserrat, where the film was mostly shot and very much inspired by.
So we have to talk about this because the locations you shot for this movie were almost inaccessible, like for anything. Like I think we did an interview a couple weeks ago, and you're telling me that sometimes to get people to go to if they had to go to the bathroom, it was like a whole endeavor just to get them out of the set. Can you talk about some of the what you guys all endured and what sort of adventures you sort of had on that island?
Yeah, I mean, it was so varied, but it was like, every day of the shoot felt like we were launching like a military campaign, but like it was like the staging, like invading Normandy every single day, but like your army is all, 6 to 9 year olds and 60 plus, and then like a 100-person crew, and so it was each location was a massive logistical challenge of like how are we even going to get there to scout, and then how are we possibly going to get a film crew there, and filming on the volcano involved working with the volcanic scientists who would sort of evaluate the safety of what we were doing. We had to build roads for evacuation routes. We had to build staircases down like massive cliff faces and zip line lunch into valleys. And each day was this massive undertaking of just how to even get to set. It would often take us 2-3 hours just to get to a location before we would even have a chance to begin shooting that location.
And you shot on film too, like, so this wasn't easy in many aspects. But I have to ask, the movie would not work unless you got the proper Wendy, and her name is Devin France, and she's fantastic. Can you talk about how you found her?
Yeah, we cast this film. We have this sort of grassroots casting method that we sort of developed, starting with my short films and in Beast of the Southern Wild, and we do it a lot in South Louisiana, south of New Orleans, where I live. And Devon actually comes from like 20 minutes away from where we found Quevenjane Wallace, and very similarly, we just go into schools and try to speak to kids. We're trying to find people who have never really considered acting before. There's so much talent out there that just doesn't reach kind of like the access point of getting encouraged to develop it. And so, especially in South Louisiana, where you have, it's just an amazing culture, and we just try to get in front of kids, specifically, even if we're like knocking on doors or whatever it is, so that, it's not just like put a flyer in the paper and all the kids whose parents want them to be actors come out and find it. You try to get in contact with kids in schools whose parents maybe wouldn't necessarily take them to something like that, and get those kids to come out for auditions. And, then we just do that as long as it takes, and look at thousands and thousands of kids, and also sort of invest a ton of time in developing those kids into actors. So.
I do want to ask how you found Peter, who's played by Yashua Mack. Because he is not from Southern Louisiana. How did you find him?
He's from. So we shot on 3 islands that are kind of neighboring islands in the Caribbean, Montserrat, and the place you fly into Antigua to get to Montserrat, basically. And Yashua is from Antigua, and he grew up in a Rasta camp there, in a very unique world. Basically, we got this idea that Peter was going to be from Neverland, as opposed to sort of in the original text, he comes also from the outside. But, spending all this time in the islands, and sort of, when I was scouting these locations, it was so apparent, it was amazing to watch the guys who were taking me out there and just how fluent they were navigating their world, and it felt like if we were going to create a convincing Peter Pan who had lived in this island for hundreds of years, it was going to have to be someone whose playground was that environment. And we actually really struggled to find kids who, this was across the board, Louisiana or in the Caribbean. Like, it was shocking to me how few kids still played outside, period, or even like or whose imagination sort of like routed through nature, through animals, and we were really on the verge of giving up. And we sort of got a tip from a friend who had shot some music videos. A lot of reggae artists go to the camp to like shoot in the Rasta camp, and he basically made an introduction to us, and we sort of, over the course of many months, got close with the whole with the various families that are part of the community, and auditioned the kids, and found Yashua through them.
Well, he's incredible, and they're all, for first-time actors, incredible. We want to take some audience questions. You, sir, right there.
Yes. Was there any character that was based off of Tinkerbell in the film?
In case you didn't hear, the question was there any character that was based off Tinkerbell?
I think that the mother sort of became like a embodiment of both Tinkerbell and the mermaids in the film, and then also like, we wanted to get rid of this idea of sort of fairy dust and like this idea of fairies and sort of put it in something natural. And so that kind of began with the volcano, and then we started thinking about like the volcano having like an organism that was like almost like its heart. And so a lot of those ideas around fairies and around what is the magic that keeps you young sort of got folded into the mother character. And certainly the ending scene where they're singing her back to life is very much inspired by when they clap the fairies back to life in the original text.
Other questions? You, ma'am, right there.
You've probably been asked this a million times, but I'm going to ask it again. This and Beast of the Southern Wild are the most astounding movies I have ever seen. And I wondered, have you always seen like this, or Did you grow up as a child? Did you look at the world this way, or
Um,
how'd you develop it, and can you teach it?
um, I'd say no. I think, my films were very different growing up. Like, the first film I made was I played Superman in a Batman movie. And it's just like, then in high school, we made like a long series of films that were like Santa Claus as like a serial killer. I made a lot of really bad movies in my life, so it certainly hasn't been forever. I think that I got to say that, and I was an animator for a long time, and that's where where I started. But a lot of this came from moving to New Orleans for me. It had a really powerful impact on me. And, I'd always sort of been interested in stories that are larger than life and fantasy. And when I went down there, I got really interested in less like people and kind of reality and sort of the ways that reality can be, as spectacular and magical as just sci-fi or fantasy. And so I think a lot of the style of Beast and the style of Wendy and the short film that I made before, it had to do with kind of like taking my interest in like myth and, larger than life stories and trying to figure out where these myths like live in our lives and live in real people. And, the way that we cast and location scout, we kind of start by writing kind of like the skeleton of a myth, and then are very willing to change it and sort of adapt it to real people whose spirit kind of speak to these characters in real places that spirit speaks to, the ideas in the film. And so a lot of, if there's anything that's like a lesson in it, it has a lot to do with kind of that thought process of like, where does magic live in our real world, in the people around us, and in the places that we can actually go and see.
You, sir, right there, yeah.
Where did the inspiration for the song that's sang throughout come from?
It's a little story, actually. The starting point was this idea of lullaby, and of having a song that would sort of connect. Whenever you heard it, it would connect you back to this moment of Wendy, of the first moments of the film where Wendy is in her mother's arms and is being hummed this song by her mother, and sort of thinking about the way that songs that we hear from our parents can kind of viscerally bring us back to being, at this point of youth that escapes us at some point. And that idea came from this moment that I had where, my parents are folklorists and they're country music fanatics, and I like rejected country music my whole life. I was like, I hate it. I was like in a grunge band, and I was like, I want to rock, And then sometime when I was like 19, 20 years old, I heard the Tennessee Waltz, and I had this like visceral reaction to it that I didn't know where it came from, and I just like flooded my body, and I was like crying, and I became obsessed with Tank Williams, and I called my mom, and I was like, Mom, you're not going to believe this. I think I just turned a corner on country music. I heard the Tennessee Waltz, and it just like blew me away. And she was like, that was the first song you ever heard in your life. Your father took you out of their tray in the hospital while I was recovering, and he would dance you down the halls to the Tennessee Waltz over and over again. And so that idea of these songs you hear from your parents as infants kind of was the basis for what that song would be, just something that's very, very simple, feels very timeless. And so that's kind of where the score started. And then the first thing we wrote that song probably back in like 2014. And then that kind of became like one of the pillars that the whole film was built around.
More questions? You, ma'am, right there.
First of all, thank you for your movies very much. I'm curious about the process of preparing the children since they were not actors. Do you rehearse, or do you give them like space to be children? And
So the question, in case you didn't hear it, was about the how you prepare non-traditional actors to act, and do you give them space, or do you rehearse, or how do you sort of do it?
It's a combination of the two. We had like an incredible privilege in this movie to invest an enormous amount of time in developing the cast, and we would we would do sort of two things. We would rehearse the scenes, and oftentimes I would start rehearsals as improvisations, so not on a script or anything like that. I would give them the ideas of the scenes and see how they would interpret it themselves. And then a lot of times also, especially like at a lot we took a lot of time to sort of get them to bond together as a group, and so we would bring the kids out actually to Antigua and sort of set them off with Joshua and his pack of 15 kids and let them just run wild in the forest, and I would sort of chase behind them with a notepad, like furiously writing down everything that was happening. So like we let them both play and rehearse, and all of that information kind of went into rewriting the script, and the idea, is really to adapt each character to the kid and sort of who they are. Oftentimes I feel like I'm learning as much from them about the character as they are from me. You try to get it to the end where they really feel empowered and like they own these people. And, some of them, I mean, like the kid who plays, the kid who plays Sweet Heavy, like, was like method. You had to call him Sweet Heavy by the end of this. Like he'd totally claim the name. To this day, he's like, yeah, I am Sweet Heavy, So that's the goal, is that they really, and not all the kids are like their characters. They definitely, it's not like we shot in sequence. It's like they really had to perform and know where they were in their arc and their story at all times. But it was a huge amount of time invested in kind of figuring out how to do that and really giving them the chance to kind of own these parts and feel like it belonged to them.
So one more question. You, sir?
In this film, we start off in a kitchen, and then we escape to the chaos of Neverland. And in Beast of the Southern Wild, we start off in the chaos of the hurricane, and we go to the kitchen in Elysium. So what's the significance of kitchens in these?
So in case you didn't hear that, kitchens and storms and hurricanes have a lot of themes in your films. How do they sort of tie together, or is it a coincidence?
I don't know. I mean, it is of a. I mean, the other thing that both of those moments in both films are about these kind of larger than life magical mothers, and I think that it's another thing for me that just feels like a lullaby, like viscerally connects me to the experience of being really young. Is just like, you're with your mom when she's preparing food for you. A lot of the time, you're watching her do it, and something about like the imagery of like the oven. This is actually, that shot got cut, but the oven opening and like steam enveloping your mother as she like takes something she's baked out of a oven. For whatever reason, like certain images just kind of come back to me and are associated with certain types of characters. And I think we didn't want to. I think there's quite a lot of things between the two films where there's dots that connect, and there's things that are referenced between them, and certainly the that idea was part of the idea that sort of Wendy is almost beginning in this place that Hush Puppy dreams of, and there was a real actually connection. The thing I didn't mention sort of in what inspired the film is a lot of what inspired the film was actually Quvenzhané herself. Going from her being in the film when she was 5 and 6 years old to when we finished promoting it and she was almost 9, which is the age that Wendy is in this film. There was, as we started thinking about Peter Pan, I was like, man, wouldn't it be so much better if like Wendy had always been like Quvenzhané and not like she's been written for all these years, like strong and strange and and all those things. And so there was a lot about Beast that flowed into this film and became the starting point from where it jumped off. So I think that I probably wouldn't have put it together like that when I wrote it, but I think it definitely makes sense.
Well, please thank Ben for being here tonight. Thank you so much for coming, and please spread the word about Wendy. Thank you.